Nerds International proudly presents
Yeah. You're listening to the Wild Die Podcast. 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 Listen 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 to the Wild Die Podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Wild Eye Podcast. My name is Eric Lamoureux, aka No Slaves McGee, and here are my co-hosts, Gary McCallum and Karl Kiesler. What's up, guys?
We're
What's
not
up,
here.
man?
Shh, Karl, don't say anything.
You want to do this to me, Gary? That reminds me like in hockey when the player, he's a rookie and it's his first NHL game and they go for warm-ups and they just leave the guy go warm up by himself and make a few laps around the rink by himself.
We're all on lockdown. Somebody's got to have some fun here somehow.
Yeah. How's it going, Eric?
Yeah, it's going. Locked down too. I still have to go to work, so
Oof.
yeah, just risking my life
There
for
you go.
deodorant packaging.
Hey, you're essential, man. People, well, not to me, because my whole premise is I'm going to become disheveled. I'm trying to hit that borderline between homeless, but still, not, because if you're homeless, people will just kick you as you walk by. But if you can breach that border where you look stinky and smelly enough that they don't want to come near you, but not homeless enough that they won't throw rocks at you, that's the golden zone right there.
Wow,
So,
like a bum.
okay, right. I won't be using your deodorant. You don't need, but it's cool that you're essential. You're essential services.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like you. Gary and I are out there and working.
Licking poles, doing all sorts of crazy
Licking
stuff
poles.
to keep the world safe.
Maybe we should cut that off. All right. So today, another segment of Writing the Kiesler. And this time we're going to, previous episode, we gave you our top 6 one-shots that you can use for your game. But now we're going to go deeper into designing your own, and especially Karl, how he does it. So this is going to be about themes and tropes.
Pow, right, Nikki, sir.
For this segment, I wanted Karl to take us to really the first step, how it all begins for him. Is it picking a setting or whatever? But we had a discussion back and forth, and it's always, well, I know for me, and it was for Karl too, it's difficult to explain really how you do things. You just do it. It's just an instinct. So it was an exercise of writing it down and trying to structure it, and that's why we came up with the themes and tropes. So what do you need? What do you mean by that, Karl?
Well, themes and tropes. A theme to me is like what kind of game do I want to run? Is it going to be fantasy? Is it going to be a modern game? Is it going to be a superhero game? Something like that. And tropes are things that you can add into that will push that forward in the game. Whether it be fantasy, like like a D&D type fantasy where we're going to fight, go in a dungeon and kill orcs and get loot. That's kind of a trope in that setting,
the cliches. So you would say that to you, the themes that's part of the setting too. Like if you were going to run Deadlands, that's part of the theme for you.
Right. Yeah. Deadlands, like the Weird West is that theme, and how would you hammer that home? Well, let's look at tropes for that. So zombie gunslingers would be a trope in that game, and specifically Deadlands, Ghost Rock, and the weird, crazy stuff you can do with that stuff. So
All right. So, I mean, last episode I asked you the question, but we had to cut it, and so I'll just ask it again here. I see a pattern in the games you run.
Oh yeah.
You seem to always go for the modern settings. Is there a reason why? Is it because it makes better games, or it's just a personal taste?
It's mainly a personal taste for me. I think modern settings to me, because I've played a lot of fantasy games in the past, and for something about like a modern setting, either it be a superheroes or like Wise Guys, or even a Western is kind of a modern setting. If you think about it, it's not really, fantastic unless you put, Deadlands type stuff in there. But I just dig it more. It's just a personal taste. But that's it. It's not whether I think one setting or theme is bad or worse than the other or better or anything like that. It's just my personal taste. It's just what I like.
It's okay, Karl. You can say it. You can say fantasy sucks. Nobody minds, right?
No, it's cool. I'm actually running a fantasy game for my other group. So I have two groups, and one of them, they're new to role playing. A lot of them are new to role playing, and they haven't been through this. So showing them, they wanted to run a D&D type game like what I was doing in Savage Worlds, and they're having a great time with it. It's cool to see them experience the stuff that I experienced, years ago, the tropes of a D&D game, of them checking for traps and, getting treasure and fighting the the orcs and the goblins and things like that. It's pretty cool. So
cool. So what are your pop culture inspirations when you do this? I
like to, whatever I'm into at the time. It could be movies, even podcasts. I've taken ideas from comic books, stuff like that. But when I look at these things, I look at them, I dissect them and see what I could do with it as like for a game. For instance, I ran a bunch of games, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen type games. If you're familiar with the comic, it was Alan Moore comic, and he took a bunch of literary characters and threw them into one group, and they fought the big bad. They teamed up and fought against a bigger evil. And I took that idea, and I've seen other people do it. I've heard it on podcasts, and there was even a Comics Alliance put out Top Shelf put out a cover at one point on April Fool's Day. It was League of Extraordinary Gentlemen 1988, and it was pretty cool because the comic it was a fake cover, and they said, "Oh, this is coming," and it was on April Fool's Day, but it had like on the cover characters like Jack Burton, Doc Brown, B.A. Baracus, all together like in this cool pose, and that was supposed to be an adventure, comic book. Of course, it never came out. It was just a April Fool's joke. But from that, I took ideas. I saw that, and I listened to other people that have done this ideas, and I've done the 80s, I've done the 90s, 2000s, 70s, all these different eras. But I just steal from everything. You just take that stuff and just put it through a meat grinder and just see what spits out at the end. I mean, it's your game, so you can put all these crazy characters together into one cool adventure and see what happens.
So the first one you ran was the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen's 2000, and that one's probably the least known of yours. I mean, I know about the 70s and the 80s one, but not the 2000. I know you mentioned it to me before. So which characters did you add to this, and was there a reason why? Did they fit a certain trope for this?
Yeah, for that game, like I said, I saw other people do the 80s version of stuff like that. So I was trying to think a little bit differently. I'm like, well, what can I do a little different? So let's do the 2000s. but I wanted to just, instead of just taking characters from like the movies or TV shows of that era, instead of just throwing them all in there and just, I had to think of some sort of theme. To me, some sort of way they're all like kind of linked together, kind of gets my ideas flowing for the game. So for that game, I thought of what was going on in the 2000s. Well, it was mostly zombies. Zombie movies was a really cool genre going on at that time.
Yeah, that's when Dawn of the Dead, the remake, came out, right?
Yeah, yeah, that was a good remake.
Yeah.
So I took characters like I just made a list of all these zombie movies and thought of what kind of iconic characters came about from these movies, and I just kind of threw them all together, like Shaun from Shaun of the Dead, the two guys Tallahassee and Columbus from Zombieland, Cherry Darling from Planet Terror was another one. Then I mixed other characters from different genres that I thought could fit in there, and that even though they not be in a zombie movie, I could probably, twist it a bit and kind of add a little bit of story to this game that would include them along with the zombie stuff, like the bride from Kill Bill. I included Machete. Laura Croft was in there, and of course, I always have to put Elvis in my games. Apparently, I had Bubba Hotep from Elvis from Bubba Hotep, and of course, Nacho Libre was in there. So it was. So the theme for that was zombies. If I remember right, it's been so many years ago. There was some sort of the Necronomicon was involved, and Bill from Kill Bill stole it and was raising the dead and all this crazy stuff. So with all that cool zombie apocalypse going on, all these characters kind of just like fell into places and stuff like that where I could write, okay, well, the bride's daughter was kidnapped, she's after it because Bill has her, and things like that. And everybody else was there to kill zombies and to kick ass and have a good time. That was a fun game. It was a lot of fun game.
Man, I don't want to play it now.
I need to revamp it a little bit. It was one of my first con games in Savage Worlds, long time ago. But yeah, I would love to.
Can always give it a spit shine.
Yeah, go back and redo a little bit of it, stuff like that.
So what about the? There was one for the 90s also.
Yeah, like I said, I like to theme my games. So like every era has some sort of theme. So the 2000s was zombies. The 90s, I took into kind of a vampire because there was a lot of vampires movies around at that time. Vampire, and I threw a bunch of Hellraiser stuff in there, which was pretty cool. And that's another thing that you could do with your games when you theme them and you add these tropes of, okay, these are zombie. What's the tropes of zombies? They got to get hit in the head, so let's put that in there, to kill them and things like that. If they're bitten, they got so much time, they might be turned into zombies and stuff like that. Vampires, you go along the same theme, the same tropes, drinking blood, sunlight, and all that. Sunlight kills them. So I threw Hellraiser in there. And another thing I like to do is sometimes I make props for my games. I actually made I got a wooden block and I made a Hellraiser cube out of it by just printing out the sides of the Hellraiser cube. And I just glued it on there. And that was a prop in the game. And they had to actually find that thing. And when they did find it, I just pulled it out of my bag and I say, all right, you found it. And I give the person the prop and it would pass hands. So I said, all right, we'll give them the cube. Now they have the cube. And so everybody knew who had this thing. And if I remember right, that game ended up, I think someone had to sacrifice himself, whoever had the cube.
Was that cube to scale?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I found I think it was like a 4-inch block of wood and stuff like that, just painted black. And
wow, you pulled that thing out of your your sack there, Karl, and you're going to see one giant fat man running the other way.
Well,
I've seen those movies.
Yeah. Well, what was cool about that game is whoever sacrificed himself and who had the cube at the end, I just gave that character that prop because I had made a bunch of them. They were easy to make. I said, all right, so that's yours. You can keep it. You can keep it. It's,
Wow.
If you don't want it, give it to someone else. So
That's awesome.
yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So you were just talking about miniatures and the terrain. So you use that as inspiration too, as a starting point for your games?
Yeah. I look at everything that I can bring to anything I can bring to the table. If it sparks an idea or something like that, especially my miniatures and terrain pieces, I might see some miniatures and think, what if, I could use those in a game? It'd be cool, because I really like that stuff, and it's really fun at a convention, I think, to have, the terrain and the props and the minis and stuff like that. It's cool, You're there for 4 hours, let's have fun. So there was one game I ran at home a couple times for different groups. It was a mashup I did where Star Wars meets Aliens. The aliens from the Alien movies.
Mm-hmm.
I had a bunch of miniatures, horror clicks back in the day made aliens, and I had a bunch of them. I'm like, what can I do with these things? They're pretty cool looking and stuff. And I also had a bunch of clone trooper minis from Star Wars. And from there, I thought of an idea of what if the clone troopers were seeking out every player played a clone trooper, and what if they had word of the Separatists had this secret weapon, and the Galactic Empire sent this group of clone troopers out there to find out what it was. Well, the secret weapon was aliens. They were cultivating these aliens. I'm like, and all this came about was just looking at these miniatures and wondering how can I merge them together, So it was a cool game, and it was a lot of fun. And once I found a map of a space station, that kind of tied it all in together. I'm like, they could be on the space station, and they have to infiltrate the space station. And then once they get to the bottom of it, they find out, oh no, there's these aliens. Obviously, the clone troopers won't know about it, but know what they are. But the players would, and you get that reaction. And it was pretty cool reaction each time I ran it. It was a lot of fun.
Wow, that sounds great. And I saw on Facebook you just painted your was it a Big Lebowski?
Yes,
too.
Yeah. There might be adventure with that. I'm still thinking about it, but that's how I do it. I'll find something like that, and I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. How can I make this into a game? Whether it be like a mashup with horror or straight up maybe a prequel to Big Lebowski, how he finds his rug or something, just one idea just kind of trails off into the other. And I'm very visual. So if I see something, I'm automatically thinking or taking notes like, how can I merge these things together? How can I make a game of this one thing? But yeah, that was a cool little some minis I did.
Some more minis that you got at Genghis too, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I got some. There's a company out there. I think it was Gunfighter's Ball is the name of the game. They had some minis that look like some of the characters from Blazing Saddles, that old Mel Brooks movie. So I was thinking maybe I could make some sort of game with those guys, with Mongo and was it the Gene Wilder's character and the sheriff? They had those three miniatures. I'm like, this would be cool. Maybe it can come up with something for these guys. So
yeah, you mash that up with Deadlands, and you got a horror comedy game going.
Yeah, there you go. That would be awesome. It's all about brainstorming and stuff like that,
And now I just want to watch Blazing Saddles again. That was so good.
It's a great movie.
All right, and your last point there before I start asking you some questions. What'd you put in there? Good artists copy, great artists steal. Yeah,
I love that quote. I've heard it for so many times. I really like that quote. Good artists copy, great artists steal. It's said that Picasso said it, but who knows? I've read that T.S. Eliot wrote a version of that before, and what it means is it means you take what you want from a genre or whatever and make it your own. Don't just copy. Like I could very easily just have said, okay, let's do like to go back to one of my league games. Let's just make a Shaun of the Dead game. Let's just take all those characters and just there's another zombie apocalypse, and what are these characters doing? Yeah, it might be fun, might be cool, Shaun of the Dead Part 2, I guess, but make it your own. Like, do something else with it, because the possibilities are endless. It's just you think of other things, the way to incorporate that. Don't just rehash the same thing, like Big Trouble in Little China. If you just copy it and just run the same thing, yeah, it could be fun, but you could do something else with it. And my 80s game, my 80s League game, had Jack Burton in it from Big Trouble in Little China, and the big bad was Lo Pan. And sure, he was doing bad stuff again, but I took it a step forward. In that game, the theme was time travel. So I included characters like Doc Brown to help along with that. Bill and Ted made a showing in that movie or that game. And Lo Pan had acquired the time traveling map from the movie Time Bandits, and he was going around time just messing up things, and it was up to these guys to stop him. So it was like a big they had to jump in a phone booth and basically follow Lo Pan throughout the time streams. So it was a little different, obviously, but it wasn't the exact same as running Big Trouble in Little China Part 2. It was totally different from a movie like that would have gone by, So make it your own. You can steal stuff and just make it your own thing. But yeah,
it keeps people on their toes. All right, so going off of that, I have a couple questions for you, Karl, because we talked about the modern games. So lots of the themes that you choose for your games come from the 80s pop culture. I mean, we're all in our 40s here, so this is when we grew up, when we were kids.
Yeah,
I can understand that. But when you run these games for younger generations, how do they react to this game? Do they get into it? Do they ask a bunch of questions? Are there any obstacles there for them?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I've had this actually come up a few times, actually more than a few times in my games, where someone our age will bring their kid along, or I distinctly remember two games. One was an 80s League game, and the other was a 70s League game. And I just had these two kids in each game just show up. And they're probably 12, 13, maybe even younger. And they had no idea who really these characters were, especially the 70s game. I don't think we asked them. They're like, I don't know who any of these people are. But because I use Savage Worlds, this is where the strength of Savage Worlds comes into play, is because of their edges and their hindrances. They really got into those roles. I do remember one kid from the 80s game. I had Doc Brown in the game, and he was cosplaying as Dr. Horrible. So he kind of had the doctor outfit already, which was amazing. And he shows up, and then he picks this Doc Brown, and he really got into it. He was talking like an old guy and stuff like that. But because of the hindrances that Savage Worlds gives us, that it's easily, it can be translatable to someone that doesn't know that character. You just read those hindrances and read some of those edges, and boom, you're right into the character.
Yeah, they're role play cues, really. So
yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's all right there in the rules if you just use them. And stat them up really well, like who they are. And because of the eras of the 80s, I think characters from TV shows and movies were like way over the top in that era. So they're very easily to write for, I think, So yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Do you make use of a site like tvtropes.org to identify those tropes of the movies you like? Because we've been talking about tropes, but how do you identify them?
Yeah, I have actually been to TV Tropes a lot, and that's a really cool website, tvtropes.org. And use that. That's a good tool to run to actually come up with any kind of convention game or one shot or even your home games. If you're trying to think of a big bad, and maybe you think of some big bad from some TV show that you saw, go to tvtropes.org and look that person up, look that character up, and you can find out because they boil it down to, like, what the tropes are that make that character,
Yeah. It's same thing with the shows, because like right now I've been trying to get a BPRD / Hellboy game off the ground for years. So I've been looking at that site to try to, so what would make a game of a BPRD game what it is. So there's a whole list there, and you can spend hours trying to dissect all those tropes.
Right.
You got zombie apocalypse, you've got big monsters, brain monsters.
Right.
So you can identify them, and if you want to do a mashup, then you can take tropes from one and put it in the other. Like I'm trying to build it off a Thrilling Tales adventure called The Curse of the Jade Monkey. So I want that adventure to feel like you're part of BPRD and all that, and I think that resource is invaluable.
Yeah, it's a great site. And if you're running like a con game or a one shot, don't go too overboard on it. Just get a few of them, and a few of them, because you're only there for 4 hours or so. You just need a few of them, 2, 3, maybe tops, and something that's really heavy hitting, and it goes a long way. I mean, just by building your game or writing your game with those ideas in mind, where you just need a few of them, really.
Yeah, I agree. So for people that are more into traditional fantasy, do you have any tips or suggestions? I mean, what kind of tropes would you add to, or twists would you add to Lord of the Rings, Willow, Lady Hawk, Conan, Game of Thrones, for instance?
Well, if you want to run something like one of those games, you just have to boil it down, like what makes Lord of the Rings or Willow, for instance, what makes Willow different from Conan the Barbarian? Just like with any other genre or theme, these are all fantasy, of course, but how are they different? Well, Willow, to me, I'm thinking, obviously, it's more family friendly. I think it was a Disney movie, if I remember. There was a lot of comedic elements, like those little brownies and Mad Mardigan turning into a giant human snowball at one point, rolling down the hill. I mean, it's very comedic and very family friendly. And if you're using Savage Worlds, you could make that movie very easily, that feel for your fantasy game. Maybe use Heroes Never Die. Maybe there's a wound cap to your user setting rules. Wound cap, Heroes Never Die. That could go a long ways to help you portray how you want to run a Willow game to a Conan game. Conan, you would probably use greedy damage. There'd be a lot of blood and gore, and it's more of a sword and sorcery type game. You definitely wouldn't have that scene from Conan, the orgy scene. You definitely wouldn't have that in a Willow game. That would be kind of weird.
Hey, definitely have that at a convention.
Or Willow meets Conan. There you go.
Dwarf orgy.
Craziness.
You had the pig to that too, like the pig in the
oh
movie.
Yeah.
All right, let's not go there. No, but using those tropes, like I know Willow inspired me I started writing a one shot a while ago. It's called Inglorious Nannies, and it's basically a bunch of gruff mercenaries that end up having to care for a baby. So
cool.
You get all these funny potential funny scenes where what if the barbarian's holding up the baby and the baby's trying to suckle on his nipples, and then it becomes crazy, or he pukes on the bard and the bard's got a fancy suit that costs him a lot of money, so it's just twisting those and mashing up those tropes together that makes it memorable, I think.
Oh, for sure, man. And sometimes you're in game and the players come up with that stuff. It's awesome. You give them the starting line and they take it all the way to the finish. Like maybe they're fighting orcs and someone says, "Oh, you start smelling something from the diaper," and he did a boom boom in his diaper. You got to fix that while you're fighting orcs.
Exactly.
Maybe you could do a crossover where Conan was babysitting Willow, and then Willow started sucking on Conan's nipples.
Even better. That's a winner right there.
Oh, but to take that even further, the even for maps and minis and props at the table, you wouldn't necessarily use all of your Conan maps and minis in the Willow game because you might have some horrific looking demon like miniatures and things like that. Yeah, you might want to bring that, blood dripping and stuff like that. You might not want to bring that in the Willow game unless you are mashing up together. But if you want to do a straight up, just find out what it is about that setting, and bring that to the forefront, and you're good to go. You could run any genre of fantasy with Savage Worlds by using hindrances, setting rules, and the way you bring it across the table with maps and minis and the way you describe things, in the game.
Sounds good. Gary's been silent the whole show. Do you have any questions, Gary, or a comment, lewd comment, another lewd comment to make?
Well, my question is, how did you guys find this tvtropes.org website? Because I've never heard of it before.
I've heard other podcasters mention it. I think that's actually the first time I actually heard about it long ago on a podcast. I can't remember which, but yeah, it's a pretty cool site. Have you been through it yet? You haven't been through it yet.
It's what I've been doing for the last few minutes is just sort of skimming through it, like looking at all the stuff that's here.
Yeah, you could lose a lot of time on there.
Yeah,
I feel like it. Yeah, that's kind of where I went to while you guys were podcasting with, and I was just doing this. Then I heard nipples, and I came back.
All right. Well, that's it for the themes and tropes. What's next, Karl? What are we going to talk about next?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. What are we going to talk about next?
Didn't you say next for you was the characters, the pre-gens?
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. How I come about my pre-gens and stuff like that, and how you can kind of fit all those holes into a game and kind of don't overlap characters and things like that. How you come up with them for a one shot,
Awesome. Looking forward to it. So let's wrap this up. I want to bring your attention to another show on the network, the Nerds International Network. It's Finding the Narrative, a Genesys podcast. So these guys have been going at it for like 3 years now, 4 years. And every 2 weeks, like a well-oiled machine. And even though there was a bit of a scare there with the Genesys system, sounds like it was saved by another company, so they'll keep making more products. So if you're curious about this setting or you already play it and want to get the most out of this system, check out Finding the Narrative. And also coming April 18th, SavageNet. So this was initially SavageCon. That's the convention that our friends over at the 3T podcast run, Harrison and Nick and James. They've been running this convention for a few years now, 3 years. This was going to be the third year. And because of the pandemic, they decided to switch that to an online convention. So they're a bit scrambling there to get everything organized for an online convention, but there are still spots open. I'm going to run something for this game too. So I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to check it out. It's a link to their Discord server. They don't have a dedicated website for this yet, but give them a break. They're just trying to get things off the ground here at the last minute. I see a lot of conventions getting canceled. Unfortunately, ChupacabraCon in Austin was canceled this year. They initially pushed it back until August, but now Tabletop Events, the overhead booking system for their convention, is shutting down because of the pandemic, also lost their revenues. So they had no choice but to cancel it, which is unfortunate. So this is Eric saying, stay safe and don't hoard all the TP.
This is Karl saying, you want to bang that?
Yes, please. And this is Gary saying, keep your pants on, keep it fun. Thanks, everybody. We're out.
I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the Wild Eye Podcast. If you would like to get in touch with us, our email is thewildeye@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Come mingle with us with the Nerds International group on Mew. And if you would like to help out the show, we have a Patreon page. Patreon.com/The Wild Eye. Speaking of which, the Wild Eye Podcast would like to thank the following patrons: Uncle J. Raz, Alan Bray, Rob Towell, Conrad and Erasmus Neubert, Corey Judd, Emma Wakeland, Kevin Stanley, Perry Chalmers, Ray Arastia, Bubbles, Dan Brown, Jan Jetmar, Manuel Sams, Mr. Stagg, Mwagan, Sean Richards, OVRPG Maps, Andy Hall, Brian Kaser, Daryl Captier, Jens Conheim, Patrick Greenlaw, Sid the Squid, and the Digital Dungeon Master. Thank you. See you later.